Hello, this is Lawrence Leng, and today I've travelled over from Sussex to Bristol to meet up with Peter Riley. I first met Peter back in the late 1970s when the D'Oyly Carte were in Eastbourne and I was given a backstage tour of Act 1 of Ruddigore. Looking at your CV, you must have held virtually every non-acting role within the D'Oyly Carte. One could describe you as the D'Oyly Carte Pooh Bar. How did this career with the company come about?
Well, hello Lawrence, nice to be with you. It came about, I left school at 16 and I'd always wanted to go into the theatre, and my mother was very supportive. I'd lost my father some years before, but my mother had also wanted to go on the stage, so she was very pleased when I did. And I went to see the manager in Leeds Grand Theatre, and asked for a job, sweeping the stage or something, anything to get on the stage. Anyway, he found me a job at York Rep, and I went and did 9 months there, and I still wanted to act, but I got very hooked on the technical side of things. And we had casual members of our stage crew working for us, one of whom was a postman who was going to see his friend, Trevor Morrison, with the D'Oyly Carte in Leeds. I said, well, ask if there are any jobs. And he did. And he came back and he said, there is a job, property and baggage master. It's yours if you're down at the theatre in Leeds tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. This was at 9 o'clock in the evening in York.
Right.
I didn't know what to do because I thought if I don't get this job, they'll probably sack me from York because I won't be there at 9 o'clock in the morning. So I had a word with the stage director in York. He said, look, go for it. You go. Don't worry. Give me a call when you've done the interview. And that's how I got the job. So that's how I got into D'Oyly Carte. I didn't even know it was an opera company. Actually.
Right.
I thought it was a ballet company.
Oh.
Until I saw the sets, and then I realised that I'd seen HMS Pinafore before.
Right. So your first role, as you say, was the property and baggage master. But as I said in the introduction, you had a variety of jobs. Can you sort of talk through some of the other the roles that you undertook during your long career with the company?
Yes, I mean, when you say roles, jobs and roles, because I did actually play in some of the operas.
Right.
I played a coolie and a guard in Mikado. I played a marine, and then sergeant of the Marines, and then the lieutenant in Pinafore. I played the headsman in Yeoman, and I also played one of the soldiers in Yeoman in Act 2. After Property and Baggage Master, the assistant stage manager we had at the time was leaving, and the stage manager, Jack Habbick, said, would you be interested in furthering your career? You can become my assistant. So I became assistant stage manager. He then decided a year later that he was going to leave. Now I was only 18 and a half at the time, which was pretty young to take over as stage manager of a company like D'Oyly Carte. But I was given a lot of support from the artists and the staff, and I took over as stage manager in 1966. And of course, I remained as stage manager for quite some time on my own. I had no assistant for 4 years. So I was doing the job entirely on my own, which meant, of course, lighting the operas and making arrangements for the company all over the place, transport and everything else. And then eventually I got an assistant, which made life a bit easier, and they promoted me to stage director. Really, I think it was, in a way, I got a feeling that they felt, well, he can't stay as stage manager forever, so we'll make him stage director. We'll give him £1 a week increase, call him stage director, and we'll see how we go. So I became stage director. After that, I became more and more involved in the technical side of running the company.
Right.
And so we added technical director to my title. So I became technical and stage director. That continued for some considerable time. I stayed on tour, of course. In 1975 or 74, I went back into London to coordinate the centenary events at the Savoy Theatre and the Festival Hall. So then my then stage manager took over my role in the company on the road, and I was in London arranging everything for the centenary, which was pretty involved, of course.
Yes.
After that, because my stage manager then left, who were they going to get to run the company on tour? So back I went out on tour as technical and stage director. As time went by, the company manager, Herbert Newby, retired. Well, unfortunately, he actually died before he retired.
Okay.
I had known that I was going to take over as company manager, which I did in when was it, 79. And I remained as company manager for just over a year. And then, at the behest of Lord Hanson and Charles McKerris, I went into London as Deputy General Manager to Freddie Lloyd, and I remained as Deputy General Manager until the company shut down. And then, ironically, on the day we closed, they made me General Manager. So they made me General Manager of nothing, really. But the whole idea was to try and get things together for a new company, which of course didn't work out. Well, not like it should have done.
Well, no.
So that sort of covers my tenure. But as you say, I did quite a few jobs with them.
Yes.
Missed out on wardrobe, never did that.
Oh, right. Over the years, you must have witnessed a number of things happening not quite as they should. Can you share any examples?
Yeah, I mean, strange things were always happening, some things we didn't even know about. But things that, from a technical angle, I remember very well being at the Coventry Theatre, and they had a new flyman on. And of course, we had a simple queuing system. Final curtain, red light warns him that you're going to give the green very shortly, and you bring the curtain in. I gave the red, the curtain came in before the end of the opera. So I gave the green, nothing happened. I knocked the red off, the curtain went out. I gave the red again to stand by, the curtain came in again. And it was going up and down and up, and eventually I shouted, "Stop!" And he stopped halfway.
Oh, no.
And eventually somebody came in and took over. But it was a pretty hairy moment. Fortunately, the cast, they were very wary of these things, and they seem to know when things have gone wrong and it's not your fault. So I didn't get the blame for it. There was, several occasions. Donald Adams was doing Iolanthe at the Savile Theatre. Must have been 68, 69, and he was playing Mount Ararat. And most unusually for Donald, because he was never sick, he was always on. He said to me after the first act entrance, he said, my voice, it's not right. I've got something wrong in the throat. Get the understudy. Donald, you never go off. He said, no. He said, I can't do Act 2. I'll never get to Act 2. I'll never get to When Britain Really Ruled the Waves. I won't be able to do it. Well, his understudy was also off ill. Now, the only person we had who could play it was Alan Styler. So I spoke to Vera, and she said, well, he's on a pub crawl with Wally in Golders Green. I said, well, where can we get hold of him? Well, we knew that he'd be in the refectory in Golders Green. So we rang the refectory, they put Alan on, and I said, Alan, could you come to the Savile as quickly as possible, get into costume and go on for Mount Ararat in Act 2? He said, you must be joking, kid. He said, I've had 3 pints. Anyway, we got Alan to the theatre in a taxi. Cis Blaine, our wardrobe mistress, managed to magic a costume from the bottom of a skip somewhere. It turned out it had been one of Henry Lytton's many years before. Wow. And we got Alan, squeezed Alan into the costume. Donald had to go on for Act 2. He did the first When Britain Really Ruled the Waves. It got to the encore when Donald decided he'd got to walk off, and Alan walked on and did the encore. But in the meantime, our company manager was then Bruce Worsley, ex-RAF. Very like that, you know. And Alan was standing next to me in the prompt corner, and Bruce came down, and he patted Alan on the back, and he said, I'm very sorry, Donald, to hear about your voice. I hope everything's all right. And Styler turned around and said, he's Donald, I'm Alan. Thanks, Bruce. Typical Alan. I mean, he was great. Then talking about Bruce, somebody, I think it was in Nottingham, a reporter was doing an article on the company, and Bruce decided it would be a good idea to take her down and watch the morning's rehearsal. And so they walked into the rehearsal room, and Bruce, very worried look on his face apparently, and one of the choristers said to another chorister, why is Bruce looking so worried? And the other chorister said, he's frightened to death. She might ask him which opera we're doing because he's got no idea. So, these sort of things used to happen. And there are many more, obviously, but I wouldn't know where to stop, Lawrence. The gondolier spaghetti scene, I suppose,
all right,
which is fairly well documented. It was always a problem. Doing a live meal on stage, getting it hot so the steam rises from it, and so on and so forth. And of course, theatres had no cooking facilities, you know. We had to approach local Italian restaurants and book the spaghetti in advance. Sometimes we had to have a taxi to pick the spaghetti up and deliver it to us, and inevitably it didn't arrive. Well, it didn't arrive. And on this particular occasion, it didn't arrive. So it didn't arrive. And what do? Well, the electrician was sitting alongside me, and he had a ham sandwich he was just about to break into. So I said, "Excuse me, can I have your ham sandwich?" "Yes, okay." So I put the ham sandwich on the plate. Jimmy Marsland was playing the waiter, and Jimmy looked at me and said, "You're joking." I said, "He's got to eat something. Send it on." He went on with it. John Reed picked it up, looked at it and said, "No thanks," sent it off again. So we had moments like that. Frequently happened.
Right, thank you. In 1973, ATV recorded HMS Pinafore to show on television over Christmas. What challenges did you face in moving the show from the stage to a studio?
Well, the main thing was, of course, exactly what you said. It was a studio, not a stage. So the set was expanded. They used quite a bit of our own set, and they also built extra pieces that they felt would make it look more realistically like a ship. They built a massive mast. They built a new bridge, different balustrades, different coloured paint, which suited the technicalities of filming better than our own, because ours was very dark paint. And they painted the floor rather than put a stage cloth down. And of course they had to expand it on the flat so they could get the cameras in and everything else. They consulted us over the lighting. We worked on that together. And I think the biggest problem, we soon realised when we got into filming, it was pre-recorded, of course.
Yes.
It was pre-recorded and then they mimed to it. And they did very well, considering they were all fully trained singers. To actually mime even to your own voice is very difficult. But they coped with it admirably. But the director, John Sickle, said to us when we were sitting in the control room, he said, "There's something missing." He said, it's not happening. And we said, no. Michael Hayland and I said, "No, of course it isn't. You haven't got an audience. You need an audience. For these people to react, you need somebody there so they can react." So in the end, he said, "What do we do about it?" So I can't remember what it was. I think it was Freddie Lloyd had the bright idea. He said, "Well, look, we've got 11,000 associate members of our trust. Why don't we invite them into the studio and they can watch a recording and react?" So that's what we did.
Right.
And when it came to the final, I mean, we did each scene was probably done 4, 5, 6 times. When it came to the final editing of the whole piece, John Sickle said 90% of it was done with the audience there, rather than beforehand when we didn't have an audience. So it just showed that this was the main challenge, I think, for everybody.
Yes.
To try and do it as a live performance, but you can only do it as a live performance with an audience.
Yes.
Different if you're trained to do film work. Interesting though.
Yes.
And of course, when we finished filming, I thought, well, there's some nice pieces in this set, which maybe we could use in the future.
Right.
And we had a bit of room in our stores, so I approached ATV and said, could we buy these from you? They said, "Well, no, you can't. You can have them, because if you don't buy them, we shall just smash them up." So we transported them to our stores.
Right.
And I thought, well, you just never know. They might come in useful. More of that or none.
Yes, yes. When I met with your colleague, Ken Robertson-Scott, a month or so ago, we talked a bit about the company's visit to Windsor for a command performance of HMS Pinafore. However, Ken kept saying, "Oh, that's Peter's story." Well, we're together now, so can you tell us about how that visit came about and the logistics of moving the company from Brighton, where you were playing, to Windsor for one night?
Peter's story. I like that. That could be a title for my book, couldn't
yes.
it? Yes. I think I'm right in saying Ken did say that I got the first call when we were playing Wolverhampton. I did. We were at the Grand Theatre, Wolverhampton. I got a call from Freddie Lloyd's secretary, Joan Robertson, at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and she said, "Peter, can you come down to London tomorrow?" I said, "Why? What's happened? Are you going to sack me?" She said, No. She said, "You're going to go to the highest castle in the land." I said, "Pardon?" She said, "You're going to go to Windsor Castle, I can't tell you any more than that. We'll tell you more tomorrow morning. Can you get here for 10 o'clock? So I thought, well, I suppose so, yes. So I got there for 10 o'clock. I went to see Freddie Lloyd, and he said, the car's at the front of the Savoy. Car's at the front. Harold Wilson and Kenneth Osborne, that was James Hanson's sort of main man, they're waiting for us, and we're off to Windsor Castle. We'll tell you more in the car. Oh. So we're going down to Windsor in Lord Hanson's Rolls Royce. Chauffeur driving us there. Now, what's going to happen is we've been asked by the Queen to give a special performance for her guests on the Thursday of Ascot Week, and it is the exact anniversary of her 25th Silver Jubilee, and it's specially for her, just her guests. Right, where are we giving this performance? Well, I'm not sure. We'll find out when we get there. So we got there, and we were met by Vice Admiral Sir Peter Ashmore. Very charming, very kind. Had a cup of tea in this very nice office of his, and they chatted amongst themselves. And then I said, excuse me, can I see where we're doing this performance? Oh, we're doing it in the Waterloo Chamber. Shall we go in there? So we went into the Waterloo Chamber. And for those people listening who've been, they will know that it is a magnificent room. It is surrounded with the most wonderful portraits and paintings and Grinling Gibbons carvings and ornate sculptures. And this was to be turned into a theatre to do a performance of HMS Pinafore. It meant building a stage, it meant installing lighting equipment, it meant physically getting the stuff in there, more of that in a minute, and so I said, okay. I realised that there was no way we could ever do a change of scenery. We had to put something up there. It would have to be just one set. So that meant we could only do HMS Pinafore or Patience, because they were the only two operas that had what we call a standing set. So I said to Sir Peter, can you tell the Queen that we can only do Patience or Pinafore? No, he said, I'm afraid I can't do that now. No, the Queen will decide what you're going to do. I said, well, could you steer her in the direction of Patience or Pinafore? I still have the letter from Sir Peter, which says, you'll be very relieved to hear that the Queen has agreed to do HMS Pinafore. So we did HMS Pinafore.
Good job she didn't want Ruddigore, isn't it?
Yeah, or anything else for that matter. So anyway, I say, we did that. And the added bonus was we had this ATV set that I was telling you about. So I realised that we could use quite a bit of the ATV stuff, which we did. We augmented our own scenery. And I mean, I had no plan. When we went in there, I had no plans. I had to find a company who were prepared to build us the stage. And I searched everywhere. I went to Yorkshire Television in the end, hoping they might be able to, because I had a contact through Lord Hanson, because he was chairman of Yorkshire. And the other problem was, of course, I said, who's paying for this? And Freddie Lloyd said, I'll talk to you about that later. So anyway, in the car on the way back, who's paying for this? He said, oh, Lord Hanson will stand all expenses. And you'll have to do a full breakdown for him at the end, but that's okay. Don't worry about money. Money doesn't come into it. It's for the Queen. As I say, but I had great trouble finding a company who would actually would make a stage for us. Eventually, Yorkshire Television put me onto a company called Shoex GB, and they were used to doing outdoor arenas and so on. So we got them in, and they did it. All the portraits were removed from behind the area we were using as the stage. And interestingly enough, when the portraits were taken down, there were cartoon pictures of pantomime characters, which apparently had been used when Princesses Margaret and Elizabeth used to perform pantomimes for the family in the Waterloo Chamber at Christmas.
Wow. And
these had been specially put in where the big pictures were. Rather interesting, the Queen's involvement with this was more than I thought. We had one meeting, one of many. I mean, I was backwards and forwards to the castle, I think 8 or 10 times. But at one meeting, Sir Peter said to me, the Queen has asked to sit in on the meeting. And I thought, God, no. Anyway, I thought this was quite something. And we had a cup of tea, and we all sat round the table, and the Queen didn't say anything until at the very end of the meeting. And she said, well, it seems very straightforward to me. All we have to do is provide the meal, and get them sitting down, and the rest is over to Mr. Riley. And I think he's got the biggest problem, because I don't know how he's going to do it. So following on from there, on the Wednesday night before the performance on the Thursday, just after midnight, Sir Peter came down and said to me, he said, the Queen and Prince Philip would like to come down and see how you're going on. I said, it's after midnight. He said, well, the Queen's just got back from a lunch, or a dinner rather, and she'll be doing the boxes. She always sits up late doing the boxes. So when she's done the boxes, she will come down and see you. Well, about 1:30, Sir Peter came in with the Queen and with Prince Philip. My rough and ready stage crew, gleaned from a fair bunch of cockneys from the West End Theatre, had been warned by me to stay stumm, not to say anything in front of the Queen, and if you do say anything, please temper your language. So when the Queen eventually did arrive, I was introduced, and she looked at these 4 stagehands, and they were literally standing there stiff as just not moving at all, not a flicker of an eyelash. And she said, how are you going on? I said, all right, thank you. Are they looking after you very well? I said, oh yes, we get sandwiches. And she said, only sandwiches? Don't they give you proper food? And anyway, Prince Philip was muttering, who's paying for all this? Well, he was looking at the red baize that they were covering the audience section with. And he said, who's paying for it? Where's all the money coming from for all this? Then the Queen spotted a roll of polythene. And she said to Prince Philip, oh, look, Philip, there's got some polythene there. That would do to cover your maps, wouldn't it? And he stopped complaining. Yes, that's a good idea. Anybody got any scissors? And some scissors were found, and he went and cut some polythene, and off they went. It was quite a unique experience.
Yes.
So, but I mean, we moved in on the Tuesday lunchtime at 1:00. We got in all the scenery. We then built the stage. We worked through Tuesday night and Wednesday night, all day Thursday. The performance was on the Thursday night. The company were bussed up from Brighton, and ironically, they were going to play Pinafore the next day as well, on the Friday. So that was a bit tricky. All the costumes were brought up. The dressing rooms we used were the King's drawing room, the Garter throne room. I think, as Ken told you, that we had to have bearers bringing water and, for washing off the makeup and everything afterwards. It was a unique experience. There were problems there too. I mean, we had to hire drapes to provide a front curtain. Problem there was we hired what we call a tab track, to run the drapes, and it kept sticking. So I was well aware that this could happen on the night. And in actual fact, when we did the curtain at the end of Act 1, I had to climb up on the rigging to make sure the curtain didn't stick. And there I was in my dinner jacket, no one could see me from the front, of course, halfway along this tab track, with my hand on the bobbin, just hoping that it wouldn't stick. Luckily it didn't. So it was fraught with problems, but it was extremely enjoyable and quite unique, obviously. But I think Ken also mentioned that I drew up a sort of plan of action.
He did, yes.
And I think Roberta put it in her book. And I mean, if anybody reads that, they would just believe it could never happen. But it did. And afterwards, of course, we had the meal, which, as I say, it was the Queen's private party, really. So she'd already given all her guests supper before the performance. We didn't start till 9:00, so it was a late start for everybody. And there was to be an interval of 2 minutes, no overture, no encores, one curtain call. And then it was off to the supper room afterwards. And various people were presented. In my opinion, not all the people who should have been, but still.
I have had that comment from other people that I've spoken to.
Yeah,
yes,
it was a bone of contention.
Yes.
I mean, I think it should have just been the whole company, and the Queen should have just come in and said, hello, thank you very much, and that should have been it. But when you start singling people out for presentation, it becomes extremely difficult, and usually the wrong people. But, there we are. And we had the supper. And I know you're going to ask me what happened after the supper, aren't you?
I am indeed, yes.
Yes, well, I got a call from the palace, not Windsor. A few days later, we're still in Brighton, having got everything back safely. And they said, we always do an inventory of everything that is laid out when we do these suppers and so on. we are several knives, forks and spoons missing. It's gold. Can you shed any further light on this, or is there any way you can get them back to us? So I put a notice on the board in Brighton saying that this had come to light, and I suggested there was a skip outside my office, a skip being what we carried all the office stuff in and the costumes. I said, if anybody has managed to find any of this cutlery, if they would please just place it on the skip during this evening's performance, no further questions will be asked. You will not be sent to prison or the tower. Anyway, a fair amount was returned, quite a few items. So I then got back onto the palace and said, what would you like me to do with them? Are you coming to London at any time? Yes. Right, okay. Well, pop them into us at the palace, rear entrance. We'll put them on the milk train and send them to Windsor. So I eventually, the next time I was in London, wrapped them up carefully and took them to the back entrance. And when I drove in, the man at the gate said, yes, Mr. Riley. Yes, I remember you from Windsor in your little yellow MG. You've brought back the stolen goods, have you? I said, yes. He said, right, you need go no further. Give them to me, turn round and go. And that was it. We got them back.
And was that the whole lot that got back, or?
Well, they didn't say that it wasn't.
Right.
So I assume we'd done quite well. I dare say somebody somewhere might have something in a drawer.
Yes.
I don't, by the way.
The D'Oyly Carte had fame as being a company that was forever touring. They were on the road for 48 weeks a year. What were the challenges of going to a new theatre every 2 weeks?
Well, luckily, when you say yes, we did. Jimmy Marsden used to refer to us as the vagabonds of the profession, which we were really. You're quite right. I mean, the first time when I became stage manager, I was fortunate enough in having quite a lot of records which gave me details of theatres that had been previously visited.
Right.
So that made life quite a bit easier. But of course, you were going into a theatre which, if you didn't know, you weren't sure what the capabilities were of the staff. You didn't know what electrical equipment they had. You didn't know how many dressing rooms they had. Dressing rooms were always a problem because most theatres were not built for a company as large as the D'Oyly Carte. You know, they were built for plays, most of them, unless they were specific opera houses. And I mean, eventually you built up your own notes on these things, and when you did repeat visits, you knew much better what you were up against. But yeah, going into a theatre for the first time, what we used to try and do, if it was a new theatre, it wasn't usually a new theatre because we'd been to most places, but I'll give you an example. We were going to play the ATV cinema, ABC cinema in Taunton. We'd never been before, so I thought, well, I better go and look at this. But when I saw it, I was horrified. And I got in touch with the office and said to Freddie Lloyd, we can't do this. The stage is only 19 feet deep. There's no way we can fly any scenery. They have no lighting equipment. Well, we've got to do it because we booked it. I said, well, what operas do you want us to do there? Oh, well, I've already decided. I said, well, look, there are certain operas we can't do. We can't do gondoliers because we can't put the gondola on, etc., etc. Well, of course, what was the first night? Gondoliers. So we had to adapt. Luckily, they had a rotten crew because they'd no idea of stage work. There was a projectionist and a caretaker.
Yeah.
And we got in the local operatic society, provided us with some of their people who helped enormously. One of whom was the Chief Constable of Somerset. And he was pushing scenery around and helping us. So those were the sort of challenges you had. And I say no electrics at all. So we had to import lighting equipment from Strand Electric at the time, and even supply our own lighting boards, which I had to operate because no one else knew how to do it.
Oh, goodness.
So those were the worst challenges. Some theatres were marvellous. I mean, you would get, when we went to the Royal Shakespeare Theatre, Stratford-on-Avon, it was like bliss because everything was perfect. The stage staff were wonderful. And one of the other things that used to get me down was, I mean, our expenses were enormous enough on tour anyway. And if you went into a theatre where there was an inexperienced stage staff, you had trouble getting the show on sometimes. I would be lighting as curtain went up sometimes. It was quite hectic. Work all day to get the show on. And of course the overtime bill was horrendous. Transport bill, of course, was horrendous on tour too. This is what stopped us touring.
Yes.
But yeah, there were always challenges, but as I say, on repeat visits they became much easier. I think it was challenges for the company themselves as well.
So you were with the company for 18 years. You must have coped well with travelling and living from a suitcase. Were there any aspects of it, though, that really got you down?
Not drastically. I enjoyed touring. It was a wonderful way to see the country. We're very lucky. Geographical tour of Great Britain, and of course America, Australia, Denmark, and Rome. Touring in England, I suppose for many people wasn't easy. I think the most difficult thing for most people was those who were touring on their own, who were probably married and had families and children at home. And those people probably also who were quite homesick, never left home before. And you had to prepare yourself when we were doing a tour. You know, we were on tour 48 weeks a year. So you packed your suitcase and you were lucky if you could get home in the interim period to probably change your clothes from summer to winter or vice versa. I think that was the most difficult thing for most people. We used to advertise in the local papers for accommodation. And it used to say accommodation required for members of the D'Oyly Carte Opera Company, bed, breakfast, evening meal. Please write to the company manager at such and such an address. And the letters would arrive. They were held by the stage manager. And he, of course, never picked out the best ones for himself. He always gave them to the company. They were distributed in the prompt corner on the half-hour call, and the company would queue up to get them. And God, it was like bees around a honey pot. Yeah. And they would then write in to the people, and they would book their accommodation. And there were several rules about this. You never ever took digs that the letter was sent in on lined notepaper. That meant they couldn't write in a straight line, so they couldn't cook breakfast. But luckily, of course, we also had a jolly good digs list ourselves, which we built up over the years. And if you found good digs, you stuck to them and you didn't tell anybody else about them, unless you were particularly friendly with these people and you wanted to share the digs with them. So that was the biggest problem, and I think it used to get a lot of people down. If you got bad digs, well, you made the most of it. I mean, as Michael Caine would say, you would use the difficulty somehow. You would make the most of your bad digs, preferably by spending as much time away from them as you possibly could and just sleeping there. And again, as I mentioned, theatres, that was another problem. Travel was never a problem for me because I was always lucky enough to have a car. But when I first toured with the company, they used to be moving from place to place by train. And they used to have the train call. And it was quite something because years and years before, the company was segregated. And they used to have the male members in one carriage and the female members in another. But things looked up after that. And they had a card school which was going on in the male carriages and so on. Money was changing hands. So I think, and we had the golf circle. We had a golf team of our own. We even had at one stage a cricket team of our own. Of course, we were entertained and feted wherever we went. I mean, we used to get honourable membership of bowls clubs, golf clubs, all sorts of things, and we used to give concerts. And we were well rewarded with suppers and drinks and everything else. So there was a good social side to touring.
Yes.
But this, of course, is also what built up the family side of D'Oyly Carte. And it was uniquely, amongst all the theatre companies that I've ever known or heard of, it was unique in that respect. We were together for 48 weeks a year. And we were ostensibly a huge family. We had our ups and downs. We had our squabbles. But we stuck together like glue. And it really worked, and that was the saddest thing when it ended. It was to me, and I think I'm quoted in several books as saying, it was like the death of a family. Yes. It was dreadful. But touring, no, I rose to the challenge of touring, and thoroughly enjoyed it.
And I think, talking about the family aspect, that is certainly true, especially with the people that I've spoken to while I've been doing this project. The fact that 42 years after the closure of the company, so many of the former members are still in touch with each other and meet up to regularly or Zoom or write to individuals to keep that friendship alive.
Yes, it's incredible. And I mean, it as you say, it reflects just how important it was. And also, it's amazing how, as you say, we have kept in touch. If something happens, and sadly it's usually a death, isn't it? If this happens, it is usually got round within 2 days because of the jungle telegraph, the D'Oyly Carte telegraph. It is amazing how we've kept in touch. And as you say, 42 years later, and we still, I was saying to you when we were having a conversation earlier, it seems awful to say it, but we enjoy funerals.
Yes.
To quote Gondoliers, we enjoy an interlude because it means we can all get together.
Yes.
So we have happy memories of the person that's passed, but we also have a good time ourselves, and we usually end up singing Hail Poetry or something like that. And it brings back all those happy memories and rekindles our friendship.
Yes. You mentioned that the company was sometimes given honorary membership to local sports clubs and, in return, then gave a concert. Vera, in her interview, talks about one of these concerts that her husband, Alan Styler, gave when he only had the girls' chorus with him. He sang the captain's song from HMS Pinafore. And if you want to find out what happened, I'm afraid you're going to have to listen to Vera Ryan's interview. When we first started talking about touring and the digs, you mentioned the fact that you've been to Denmark and Rome, not necessarily the places that you would expect Gilbert and Sullivan to be loved and understood. How were the operas received in those countries?
Denmark was good. Denmark was okay because English is virtually their second language.
Yes.
So no problem at all there. No problems at all.
Because you did Pinafore there, I think.
We did.
Yes,
we did. Pinafore and did we do Mikado? I can't remember. Pinafore and Mikado. No problem at all. The chap who was very instrumental in us going over there was a big wig with Danish TV. He was called Jan Louis Peterson. A great character, and he had translated Pinafore from English into Danish. And he said his only problem when he translated it was he couldn't find the Danish equivalent of pocket borough. He said it was the only Anglicism that he couldn't come to terms with. He said apart from that, he said, I think the Danish understood it quite well. So no problem in Denmark. Rome was a different matter. And we did Iolanthe and Mikado. And we opened with Mikado. And a man who was very helpful to us over there with the British Council was called Jack Buckley. And he was Yorkshire stroke Lancastrian and with a strong northern accent. And we got to the interval of Mikado and it had been quite poorly received. And I said, what's the matter? They just don't... He said, well, they can't understand it. I said, well, no, they can't understand it, but surely they can follow it. He said, no. He says, look, it says here, D'Oyly Carte Opera Company, de Londres, Gilbert et Sullivan. He said, they're expecting to see lots of English people. He said, a load of Japanese on the stage. He said, they don't know what's going on. He said, they're confused. So it did sort of bring it home, but it was probably the wrong opera to do in Rome. Iolanthe went down much better. But yes, and also, of course, the language barrier. Danish, again, no problem. But when we got to Rome, I had an interpreter. Now, he didn't speak very good English, and I didn't speak any Italian. And, you know, trying to light a show in a foreign language.
Yes.
And they actually, they used, when we were doing electrics, we go from 0 to 10. Well, they go from 10 to 0. So you're having to reverse everything you normally do.
Cause confusion, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it was interesting. Anyway, it must have gone quite well because when we left, the chief technician gave me his hammer.
Oh.
Which was a special Italian hammer, which I still have in my toolkit.
Excellent. So, yeah, we've talked about Denmark and Rome, but you went to America and Australasia. Were there any sort of issues with sort of packing up a sort of full opera company and taking them so far afield?
Yes. The biggest problem, of course, everything has to be inventoried, and I mean every button, every costume. You can't put, for instance, on the inventory one skip containing 8 costumes. It has to be one skip containing one costume with doublet, collar, cuffs, buttons, how many buttons, everything. It's absolutely enormous task. And our inventories were as thick as a Bible. Luckily, they were so well done that the customs authorities obviously took one look at them and thought, these people know what they're doing. We'll check one skip, or we'll check one piece of scenery. Every piece of scenery was marked. That was also listed on the inventory and was identifiable by the inventory and by the marks on the scenery. Of course, everything had to be packed into containers and was then sent on ahead. America, of course, that used to, for the containers to get to America from London, that would take 3 weeks.
Right.
So we had to take whatever operas were going abroad, we had to take out of the repertory over here and put the other things in that we weren't taking, then unpack them at the other end. Same with Australia, of course. That took 10 weeks. So it was quite a difficult operation. I remember arriving once we had a storekeeper in London who was the most wonderful chap at packing scenery, and he could get the largest amount of scenery into the smallest space. And we got to Washington and we opened the container, and the American carpenter who we had to take on to do our side of things, the American carpenter said, "Gee, this guy must have had a huge shoehorn and a big jar of Vaseline to get this stuff in here." And that was how it was done. I mean, we used to do most of it in 3 containers.
Wow.
And so, yeah, that was a problem. And also when we got to Australia, we had to go to New Zealand. And of course, we couldn't send it by sea. It would have taken too long in the tour. So we had to fly it. And we couldn't find an aircraft that had a big enough cargo door to get all the scenery through. And in the end, we finished up with a Boeing 747, which wasn't big enough. But we had a DC-10, which was big enough. The problem there was everyone was very worried because it was at the time when the cargo doors were blowing off the DC-10s. So we had to say to the company, this will be all right, it's our special plane, we can go in that and the scenery is beneath us. And we made it. So, but there were a lot of problems abroad, yes, there were. But they were, again, we usually had much better theatres.
Right.
They were very well equipped. And of course the added bonus was, for the company, we were staying in hotels. So in most cases it was better than digs.
And an opportunity for people to see different countries.
Oh heavens, yes.
Yes.
And of course the hospitality, particularly in America, was absolutely wonderful. And like I said, even over here we were feted and looked after. But in America, I mean, you had the choice of 3 parties a night.
Wow.
And American people, you know, we're still in friendship with many of them. I know that many members of the company still keep in touch with their American friends and the Australian ones. We didn't have long enough to form friendships in Italy or Denmark, but no, we made lots of friends all around the world, really.
The company closed in February 1982, giving a farewell concert to friends of the D'Oyly Carte. I was lucky enough to be in the audience for that very emotional night. That must have been very difficult to pull together, especially dealing with the logistics and the emotions involved with that event.
Yes, the emotions, by Jove, you know, it was high on emotion. We did the matinee at Pinafore, which was, David conducted, and I remember, very difficult for him because he knew it would be the last time he would conduct a full performance. The company had already done many of their final performances, and I mean, the atmosphere was tangible, as you can imagine, getting ready for the evening performance. I had little to do with it. It was left, I think, almost entirely to the touring company, and ideas came from all over the place, and very good ones, of course, as you witnessed. You know, the idea of the girls dressing up as cleaners and everything else was wonderful, smoking cigarettes and everything. But I think they did a wonderful job. But it was them that put it together, so it was it was their night. But at the end, and you may remember this too, I think it's the first time and the last time that the company would ever, in its entirety, fluff their words.
Yes.
And the very, very end, we leave you with feelings of pleasure.
Yes.
They lost it. They completely, and that was sheer emotion.
Yes.
And as I said to you earlier, to me it was like the death of a family. The only part I had to play in that was we had a guest list, and I made sure we invited the Arts Council, and they were gracious enough to accept. So in the interval, it was decided that various members of London management, Freddie Lloyd, Dame Bridget, Sir Hugh Wantner even from the Savoy, and myself and Albert Truelove, the secretary, would entertain various people. I opted for the Arts Council. And I got Roy Shaw, who was then Secretary General. And we had a chat, and at the end of the performance, he sought me out And all he said to me was, "I think we got that wrong, didn't we?"
Oh.
And that said a great deal to me,
Mm.
that they'd actually realised that they'd made a mistake. They should
Yes.
have given us some money. But yeah, it was, and we did record it, of course. We recorded I arranged that too.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, because I had that recording. Well, I've witnessed it, and I have often played that last chorus from the Gondoliers.
Yeah. It's not the best recording in the world. It was done under difficult circumstances, but it's a nice record of the event.
It is.
We also have one, incidentally. I don't think anybody else knows this. We also have a recording of the centenary night at the Savoy, but it's lost. Yeah, it is somewhere. I know it's somewhere because I took it. I took the cans to the Musicians' Union, where they were in South London, and Equity got a copy as well. And I know there was a third copy which Decca kept, because it was done privately by one of the guys at Decca for us. So there are 3 copies of that centenary night somewhere. But when people have tried to find them, they couldn't get them.
Wow.
So there's a mystery, you see. There's a Gilbertian mystery there somewhere.
Well, as well as Gilbert and Sullivan, I'm a great fan of Tony Hancock, and there were 20 episodes of Hancock missing from the BBC archives. Over the last 3 years, 2 of those episodes have come to light. So fingers crossed that the Trial by Jury and Sorcerer, was it both of them, the Trial and the Sorcerer, that was recorded?
Yes, yeah, the whole night, the speeches, everything.
With Harold Wilson at the end.
Yes.
Oh, it'd be nice if that came to light.
It would. It would. Yes. Bonus.
Considering the fact that you were with the company for 18 years, what would you say was your happiest moment with the cart?
Oh, many. Happiest or greatest? Well, a bit of both, actually. I think one of the happiest achievements, let's say, I think was Sorcerer. The first performance of Sorcerer in Manchester, I think, was an incredibly happy achievement. It's something we'd done from scratch, which we'd never done before, and the whole company had come together most expertly to put it together. Michael Hayland had done a brilliant production. The sets were done by Osbert Lancaster, which was, again, totally different for us. And it was a wonderful sense of achievement. I will never forget sending the curtain up on that first night with a feeling of great pride, and bringing it down feeling the same. We'd done it. We'd achieved something really special.
Yeah.
It was fantastic. And to me, it signalled a great sense of achievement from a remarkable company. Also, happy days. One of the happiest days, I think most people, when asked this question, most people who spent time at Central City in Colorado, in the opera festival there, would say that they were very happy times. We had a wonderful time in Central City. The company first went there in 1955, when I was a child, of course. I didn't go. But in 1968, we went there again. And we had a wonderful 6 weeks up in the mountains, fondly remembered. And again, fond friendships still remain from that. Not many left, unfortunately, now over there. But no, I think, and many more happy occasions. We had company weddings. They were always good do's. And company parties were always good fun. But on the whole, it was 99% happy days.
So when I was talking to Michael Hayland recently about the Sorcerer, he did say, Peter, that you were quite heavily responsible for a lot of John Wellington Wells magic effects. Can you give us a little bit more information about that?
Yes, well, it wasn't really me. It was me and Supreme Magic. Supreme Magic being a company in Devon, and they were sort of really conjurers' agents, and they used to supply all these little tricks to conjuring outfits. And they had what's known as a finger flash, which you could hold in the palm of your hand, and you put in it, stuffed it with some fire wool. It had a small battery in it, and when you pressed it, you got a most fantastic flash, which appeared to come out of the end of your finger. So we had one of those. We also had what they always used to use in pantomime. We got some flash boxes, which we used to put in the footlights, and you load flash powder into those across a terminal, with a piece of fuse wire, and when you activate it, of course the flash powder catches fire and you get a magnificent effect. You can put coloured flash powder in to make it look better. The big one was the teapot, the exploding teapot. So we managed to get a great big enamel 1 gallon teapot. We put a false bottom into it,
right,
so we could get a battery underneath, and we put a switch on the handle, and we put a flash terminal into the teapot attached to the battery with some flash powder wrapped in a little sack, so that when John Reed held up the teapot and pressed the button, this magnificent flash would come out of the top. But what we didn't realise, what happened by mistake, was because we'd got the false floor in the bottom of the teapot, the flash created a circle of smoke because of the shape of the teapot top. That was done by mistake.
Right.
But everyone thought, how did they do that? And then we had different varied coloured lights, so we flashed all the lights at the same time, which gave this effect. There was so much going on, we didn't really want anyone to see what was really happening. You know what I mean? So we thought we'll baffle them with science.
Yes.
And it seemed to work, because everyone thought it was quite a good scene.
It was.
Yes, it worked very well, didn't it?
Yeah, I loved
Yes, it
the
did.
Sorcerer. Yes,
We all enjoyed Sorcerer.
Yes, it was
Short opera too, it meant you got to the pub quick.
No, it was definitely one of my favourites.
Yeah.
So the company closed in 1982. How did you keep yourself occupied after that?
Well, to start with, as I said, I was appointed general manager of nothing. The idea was, although there was no money forthcoming, the idea was that we would explore the possibilities of reforming. And it was quite plain to me that this hadn't been properly addressed by the trustees. And in actual fact, there wasn't a meeting of the trustees between the company closing and between the time when I left in the September of that year. And I only left in September because I could see that nothing was happening and we were just jogging along. And I might also add that during that time, everybody had said that Lord Forte had no other intention other than getting control of the Savoy by backing D'Oyly Carte. Well, Lord Forte actually paid for all our office overheads once the company closed, in the hope that we might be able to reform. So I'm glad to put that on record, because, you know, he was painted as the villain of the piece.
Right.
And okay, it may have been to try and get hold of the Savoy. Well, okay, if that meant D'Oyly Carte surviving, that was fine with me. But it didn't happen. So I left. I was lucky enough to have a choice of things to do. When we did Chariots of Fire, we did a small piece in that, as you know. David Putnam said to me, if ever you want a job, come and see me. So I went to see him, and we had lunch together, and he said, well, yes, he said, I can find you something. He said, you've arranged sponsorship for D'Oyly Carte, you might be able to get me some money for some films. He said, we'll talk about it. I got back to my office that afternoon, and there'd been a telephone call from Louis Benjamin, who was running Moss Empires. And he said, Peter Todd, who was managing Bristol, is moving on. Would you be interested in Bristol Hippodrome? So I said yes. And, well, at the end of the story is, yes, I took the general management of Bristol Hippodrome. So I spent 2.5 years there. That was then taken over by Apollo Leisure, and we didn't get on together, because quite honestly it meant that I was going to be the manager of a building rather than the manager of a theatre. I would have no choice in what content went in or anything. So I gave up there. I then went to Dublin for 6 months. Dublin Gaiety Theatre was being run by Dick Condon, who was quite ill at the time, and so he had to forgo his post, and I went in there to run it whilst they found somebody to take over. I came home from there, didn't know what to do, so I got in touch with a friend of mine. I thought, I'll run a pub. So I got in touch with a friend of mine who said, right, well, you need to know about it first. Come and work with me and we'll see how it goes. So I went and worked with him for 3 or 4 months, and then went into partnership with him in his pub in the village where I now live. When that finished, I took on a pub of my own for a couple of years, And then that was one of these entrepreneur deals that always go wrong. So I pulled out of that, took a hotel in Bristol for 5 years, and then ostensibly retired. Although when I retired, I found I was getting bored, so I took some part-time driving work with car rentals,
Right.
picking up and delivering cars. And I'm still doing that today, 3 days a week at 78 years old. So
Wow.
I'm coping.
Jolly good. Okay, so thank you so much, Peter. It's been great to spend time with you this morning. So thank you so much for sharing some of your thoughts and memories with me. And I hope that the viewers and listeners on YouTube enjoy what you've had to say.
Thank you very much, Lawrence. I'll just say one thing about Eastbourne, if I may, which is again comes into funny stories. The stage manager of Eastbourne was a jolly good chap called Ian Dean. Now, when we used to go into theatres, one of the first questions I had to ask was, do you normally play the national anthem here before the performance? And Ian said to me, well, you can take your choice. He said, you could play the national anthem before the performance if you want, but the chances are that you wouldn't hear it because of the walking sticks rolling down the aisles and the static caused by the hearing aids. But he said, please yourself. So that's my memory of Eastbourne, apart from you, of course. Anyway, thanks very much for having me. I always enjoy talking about the company, as you can probably tell.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Peter. Thank you so much.